In March of 1996, Capcom released Street Fighter Alpha 2 in arcades across North America. It was a sequel to Street Fighter Alpha, which continued the story for characters we knew and loved, including some from the classic beat-em-up Final Fight. The original had been a very solid game, but suffered from stages that weren't very exciting, a subdued soundtrack, and a small roster of fighters that were missing a number of staples from the Street Fighter universe. With Alpha 2, Capcom wanted to expand everything. More fighters, better graphics, more emotional music, and a new combo system to liven things up. When the inevitable console versions were announced, me and my buddies had to have it on Saturn as soon as it was released in Japan, which came in September of that same year, just 6 months after the arcade edition. While I had been expecting another bang-up conversion from Capcom, what they delivered was nothing short of spectacular. Even without a RAM expansion, Street Fighter Alpha 2 was, simply put, one of the best arcade conversions a home console had ever seen. In this episode, we will be taking a look at that, talk a bit about its visuals, sound, gameplay, and extras, and see if it's still the titan it was all those years ago. I hope you guys enjoy my review of Street Fighter Alpha 2 for the Sega Saturn. First available in Japan where it is known as Street Fighter 02, Capcom kept many of the additions that began with the first installment. You still get the 3-tier super combo gauge, air blocking, throw and ground recoveries, and of course alpha counters, for which the fighters now have 2 instead of just 1. Also making a return are the rival battles and the story-related final boss encounters that changes fighter to fighter. Changes include the chain combos from Alpha 1 being replaced by a new system called Custom Combos. It's directly tied to your super combo gauge, and should you hit 2 punch or 2 kick buttons simultaneously, you start what is essentially a custom super combo that allows you to link many of your normal and special attacks into one long offensive string. Should you fell an opponent using the custom combo, you get the burst of light just like with a standard super combo. Also new to this entry are 5 fighters added to the roster of 13 from the first one. You have Sakura, a school-aged girl who is Ryu's biggest fan, Gin, an assassin that fought in the very first Street Fighter tournament, Dalsim, the stretchy Indian yoga master trying to save his village, Rolento, the former Mad Gear member from Final Fight, and finally Zangief, the great Soviet wrestler. There's also some secondary versions of a few of the fighters that offer additional movesets or visual changes. Among them is Shin Akuma, Evil Ryu, Original Chun-Li, and the Champion Edition versions of both Zangief and Dalsim. The Saturn version also featured an extra illustration mode that has a bunch of cool art images of the cast and locations from the game. This was not included in the PlayStation edition. Aside from these additions and changes, the gameplay is very similar in timing and flow to the first Street Fighter Alpha. There are some additional balancing tweaks that attempt to make the matchups more fair, and it has a training mode for newcomers. For those of you that enjoy a good challenge to test your skills, there is also a couple of survival mode options to see how long you can last against the bloodthirsty AI.
Round 1, fight!
Hadouken! 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 Hadouken!
Before the Saturn, arcade ports of two-dimensional fighting games had come with many concessions. You often lost sprite size, animation frames, color, detail, and other visual downgrades that were extremely noticeable. But once again, the Saturn conversion comes through with excellent results. Side by side with the arcade original, you can see the Saturn reproduces the color, sprites, and backgrounds extremely close. Due to some resolution differences, you will notice some things appear wider, particularly the fighters, but outside of that, the Saturn does an outstanding job. You will notice on some of the larger characters that there are some animation cuts in the home version, but you'd have to break it down frame by frame to notice it on most of the characters. This is not compatible with the extended RAM cartridges, so what you see here is 100% the Saturn alone. Honestly, the first Alpha port on the Saturn had been quite good, but Alpha 2 was a visual revelation. It showed that the Saturn could do these games, even the best of them, quite a bit of justice. Very little had to be sacrificed, and what did get cut will not be missed by anyone but the most die-hard frame counters among you. The performance was spot on as well. Slowdown plays no part in your battles, and the multi-layered backgrounds add a great sense of flair and depth to your environments. It's one of the best looking and running two-dimensional fighters from that generation. While I enjoyed the music from the first Alpha, the soundtrack here is a big upgrade. There's more of it too, but like most things related to art, opinions will vary. So let's have a listen so you can make your own conclusions. My appreciation for the quality of this game cannot be overstated. From the sound and visuals to the superb gameplay, it's damn near fighting perfection. The roster of fighters is diverse and interesting, and I actually enjoyed the individual stories for each one as well. The battles I had with Shin Akuma were legendary, and getting that win on the highest difficulty was always satisfying. Of course, 2 players add a ton of competitive variety to the replayability. The fan service was great as well. You'll see familiar faces in the backgrounds like Mike Hager, Morrigan, Felicia, and a ton of others. And speaking of backgrounds, they are a huge part of the appeal here. From Gen's back alley to the windswept fields during a storm, they just ooze personality and charm. That extends to the excellent opening animation as well. A fire-lit Akuma gives way to some great music and character introductions, one of the better in the series. This game is a legit total package and one of the best of its kind. I don't have many, but I do have a few gripes that I'd like to bring up. I was very disappointed that Capcom did not expand on the dramatic battle option present in the first Alpha. It would have been great to see Ryu and Ken against Shin Akuma, or any other fighter that could have been AI boosted. Dramatic battle added a very nice co-op element to Street Fighter that I loved and me and my friends really enjoyed from the first one. While I realized that the robust dramatic battle options of 0-3 were impossible without that 4MB RAM cartridge, I still feel we could have had something here worth adding. I was also not a fan of the custom combo system the game offered. Experimentation can bring about some cool results, but overall they felt kinda cheap and amateurish. I mean, launching into a custom combo took nearly no skill at all, and you could chop off 30 or 40% of a life bar just mashing buttons on the controller. Finally, and this is such a small thing I admit, I really do wish that the master rankings from Alpha 1 were kept. It was cool to have a record of your best play sessions, and it's completely gone here. Outside of those personal issues, you won't find much to complain about. It's beautiful, plays great, and is simply put, one of Capcom's best efforts. Like most high-profile Capcom fighters of the era, there are a number of versions of Street Fighter Alpha 2 you can enjoy. While not quite as complete as the Saturn edition, the PlayStation actually does a commendable job with it. It's missing a bit more animation, Evil Ryu, and the illustration mode, but it's not a bad game by any stretch. For the most part, it plays great, the graphics are solid, and many of the sound effects are actually of higher quality than even the arcade version. It's not bad at all. Shockingly, there was a Super Nintendo conversion of Alpha 2 as well. While I certainly give Capcom an A for effort, this release of the game has a ton of issues. It doesn't play particularly well, the sound is way off, it's missing a few of the hidden fighters, and there are even slight loading times. It's fun to visit to see the Super Nintendo doing a game of this caliber, but in reality, it's not something you'll choose with much better options out there. For you Super fans that can't get enough, Capcom also did an update to Alpha 2 called Alpha 2 Gold in the West and 02 Dash in Japan. This release first appeared in the Street Fighter collection and has additional EX fighters, a versus option to use Kami, additional special moves for some of the characters, and an Akuma mode where you battle a powered up Shin Akuma. It was later released as a standalone budget title for both the Saturn and PlayStation in Japan. Of course, nowadays you have emulation reissues on everything from the PlayStation 2 to the Xbox One and PlayStation 4. Honestly, I prefer the 32-bit home conversions for what they are. While arcade purists lament anything that feels different, I like that each version has their own little idiosyncrasies that make them unique. Change is not always a bad thing. A few years after Alpha 2 was released, the Saturn got the 4MB RAM card supporting Street Fighter 03 in Japan. While it stayed exclusive there, it is often considered the pinnacle of the series thanks to its massive roster of fighters and its deep and very dramatic battle options. While it certainly deserves the praise it receives, I feel Alpha 2 here is a very close product in terms of quality and fun factor. It was such a huge leap over the first one in pretty much every way, and it didn't need a RAM expansion to accomplish it. I also love the fact that you can set the computer AI to play the versus mode. In the options set player 2 to calm, and bingo, you can play versus against the computer, any fighter you want. Likewise, this worked for the first player as well, so setting both to calm would give you a watch mode where the CPU battled it out amongst itself. There was just so much bang for your buck here no matter the platform it was released on. My friends and I played it for months without a care in the world. It was as close to the arcade at home as we had ever seen, and the Saturn release was the best of the bunch. It's one of the defining experiences that made the 32-bit generation so special. A time when the lines between arcade and console began to blur to the point where differences were almost not worth complaining about. For those of us that had been waiting for that moment, a Saturn had provided the best way to play it, something that is often glossed over by those who weren't there or didn't own the platform at the time. You can talk about sales numbers and gamers wanting 3D polygons until you were blue in the face, but for me, games like Alpha 2 here were every bit as important to my 5th generation experience as a Resident Evil, Metal Gear Solid, or Final Fantasy VII. Two-dimensional games had never looked or played so good, and they have held up over the years a hell of a lot better to boot. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.